That's right. We're full into the fall swing here, mid-November. Welcome back. Another edition of the Buckeye broadcast with Emmet, Brady. On each episode of the broadcast, we take a deep dive into the facts, the figures, the players, the positions of the Ohio State football season and other things about the state of Ohio. The Scarlet and Gray are having another great season here in 2016. A lot of surprises, a lot of shifts in the season, but after last week's dominant performance against Nebraska, people are feeling pretty good here. And as you know, if you've tuned in before, on each episode, we also take a look at a different health and fitness topic through the DAYMA PhD system. It's an acronym for dance, athletics, yoga, and martial arts. And this week we are taking a look at the same thing that everybody looks at when they walk out their door. It's the season change. The sun is getting shorter. This past week we did the daylight savings time. And we're going into the cold weather. All kinds of shifts happen inside our bodies when the environment changes and gets a little bit colder. And that's what we're going to talk about on today's episode. What does the cold air do to your breathing? And what can you do to stay healthy as the season continues to shift? And if you're a football fan, you're outside watching games, especially if you're in Columbus. Last week, big game against Nebraska, number 10 Nebraska, and they walked away with a kind of almost a boringly dominant performance against the Cornhuskers. Tonight they are playing the Maryland Terrapins, so it's a nice time to be a Buckeyes fan. There's not going to be too much of a stress against Maryland. They have a pretty impotent defense. We'll talk about that in a minute. But first, a recap of last week's game. The Bucs are back up in the top 10. I think they wound up at number 6 on the polls this week. Everything was firing last week. It started off first couple possessions. Well, actually, the very first defensive stand of the season, Mr. Malik Hooker, possibly the Doak Award, the Doak Walker Award winner for the entire country, the best D-back in the NCAA. The Buckeyes broke a record with their fifth and sixth defensive return for a touchdown this season. That's tops in the NCAA. Malik Hooker did his second one, and man, he is fun to watch. Most of the time, people want to focus on the Buckeyes' offense and offensive production, but this year, the defense is just as much fun to watch. They held Nebraska to only 3 points. Obviously the injury to Tommy Armstrong in the game, the head injury, was real scary. Nobody wants to see that happen, especially to a class act like Tommy Armstrong. But he came back. It looked like he's okay, at least as far as maybe not playing goes, but as far as his daily activities go, he came back out on the field. But it was pretty much a no-brainer last week from the word go. I think personally the most exciting thing about the Bucs last week was that all the young players got a shot. They started to find a rhythm that just seemed to be absent against Penn State and Northwestern, and this is becoming a little bit of a pattern for the Urban Meyer Buckeyes, where they come on strong early in the season, and then by midseason there's kind of a lull, and they just sort of have a blip on the radar, and that's sort of what happened, a big one against Penn State. But in my experience, I would say that it's okay that a young team loses during the season. It takes a little bit of pressure off that undefeatedness, and we all know what's down the road. 3 games left in the season, and next 2 weeks, just not too much to sweat. Maryland and Michigan State, but then, of course, the northern enmity of against Michigan Wolverines to finish off the season on November 26th, I think, is the game. So recapping the numbers, it all looked pretty good. J.T. Barrett threw for almost 300 yards, 4 touchdowns, no interceptions. He looked really accurate. We got to get a look at the future as well. Joe Burrow came back in, and he looked real sharp on the drive that he was able to score on himself. That's the backup quarterback there. We had over 200 yards rushing once again, and really, the player of the day every week is Curtis Samuel. He had 40 yards rushing, 137 yards receiving. Just looked sharp all the way around. Early on, J.T. Barrett missed a few open opportunities, and it was causing some concern. But later in the game, it was really the freshman that stood up and looked really good. Demario McCall looked terrific. KJ Hill, both true freshmen, had 5 catches, 66 yards. And, of course, that was after the Cornhuskers had been thoroughly deflated. But we knew that was going to be an issue, that the Nebraska defense was vulnerable, and even though they'd played well, they definitely hadn't found a rhythm against a team like Ohio State, so that looked really terrific. And on the defensive side, like I said, the other thing about the offense, they gave up no sacks last week, which was just huge because that had been a problem with some of the other Big Ten teams that they faced. The defense, not a problem whatsoever. They pressure all day long on Nebraska's quarterbacks. It looked kind of like a pro team against a college team last week, so happy about that. And 62-3 made a really bold statement to the I think the pollsters, and it's positioning Ohio State nicely. It's a good way to rebound off a couple off weeks at any level of football, but especially when you're playing for the potential national championship. We know it all comes down to Michigan, and there we go. So this week against Maryland, again, there's not too much to worry about. Maryland's defense is very porous. They've given up, they ranked 12th in the Big Ten. They've given up over 400 yards a game in offense. So, and that's pretty much on, a combination of pass and run. So they don't really have any specialties whatsoever. They're coming off some losses against, the total yardage they've given up over the past 3 games has been over 1,300 yards. So, and on offense, Maryland has produced some good results. They got demolished by Michigan, but they've got a lot of young kids on the team. Their quarterback, Perry Hills, he leads the Big Ten in completion percentage, and he's at almost 70% for the field for the season. So he doesn't make a lot of mistakes, but he also doesn't necessarily put up a lot of points on the board. And he ranks 7th in Maryland history in touchdowns, and most of those are passes. They've got a couple of wide receivers. Levon Jacobs had good success, and he was leading Maryland's career receptions. And there's a couple of freshman running backs, especially Lorenzo Harrison. He's got over 600 yards. The other thing the Maryland offense is unique in the Big Ten is that they have 2 running backs that are both over 600 yards for the season, and the other one being, in addition to DJ Moore, that's Lorenzo Harrison. So they're a young team. They're kind of rebuilding. Now, DJ Durkin is their head coach, and he coached under Urban Meyer at Bowling Green. So there is a little bit of a legacy there. He is a first-year coach. He's a freshman coach, so there's not a lot of expectations of the Maryland team. Don't necessarily think they're going to pull out a big upset here. As a matter of fact, I think it's going to be just the opposite. It's going to be a little bit of target practice for the Buckeyes, but I think it's a really good idea for the next 2 weeks for them to play a lot of the freshmen, because basically what happened in the middle part of the season is they stopped using all of their offensive weapons. They didn't go to Curtis Samuel enough. Noah Brown, Dontre Wilson has definitely underplayed his season this year. He's a dynamic player, but he just makes a lot of mental mistakes, and they ran out of options for JT Barrett. So they fell down to becoming a running game, and that is not what the Big Ten is all about anymore. They got to be able to throw the ball downfield, and these new freshmen that are stepping up for the Buckeyes, I think, are going to present a real problem for the Maryland defense, and that's what it's all about. Now, the weather's real nice right now, and it's going to be nice in Maryland for the game today. I think they're expecting in the high 60s this afternoon into this evening, but that wasn't the case during the week. The temperature swung pretty greatly. It got down into the high 30s at some points this weekend, and it was cold and damp. What's that doing to each one of us while we breathe, while we enjoy each football game? Well, there's a couple things that happen in cold weather, and just to dispel the rumor, it's called a cold because, back in the day, people might get sick during the cold weather more than other times, but it's not really because the cold air causes anything inside the body. What it does cause is a chain of systematic reactions, and really the most important thing for someone to do, whether you're exercising outside or just enjoying the game, you want to keep your nasal passages warm and moist. Our human design is pretty fascinating. We can take air that's as cold as 30 or 40 degrees, and within less than a quarter of a second, the blood that is going through your nasal passages can actually warm the air to body temperature. However, there are some changes that happen. With all of this excess blood running to the nose, especially when you're nose breathing rather than mouth breathing, and that's something I'll talk about in a second, your body actually produces more mucus. Now, mucus is a natural byproduct of the epithelial lining of the body. That's your skin layers. And it's the endothelial layer inside the mucuses, which is inside the skin, rather than the epithelial, which is outside skin. And with what basically happens is when the cold air comes in through the body, you work a little bit harder to warm it up. And if you're breathing through your mouth, all of the normal pathogens and all the little particulates and bacteria and things that come in through normal breathing that get caught in the nose hairs and the mucus, they go right into the lungs. So generally in colder weather, people are a little bit more taxed, especially once they start getting stuffed up or congested, and it becomes a chain reaction. So the little nose hairs inside your body that inside your nose that capture particulates, they start to get coated with mucus, and the mucus has a sort of a shelf life. When it's first produced, it's very beneficial. If it continues to build up, it can actually get hard in cold air, and that's when you start sort of this downward spiral as far as the air that and the particulates that are getting into your lungs. So if you keep your mucus lining fresh with a little saline saltwater flush, that's really important. You'll see on the sidelines during football games, the players will start wearing air masks or little mitten masks and scarves and things like that. But you can take it a step further. That's just to prevent the air from coming in too cold. But if you take a little bit, you do a saline nasal flush, and then take a little bit of olive oil and you put it up into your nasal passages. This helps sort of create a temporary, an artificial mucus layer that you can then either flush out or blow out with a Kleenex. And the other thing that happens with cold air, and this is something that's really complicated inside the body, is that in response, if you start doing a lot of mouth breathing, the lung starts producing what are called histamines. Histamines are chemicals inside the body that result in inflammation. And when you start to accumulate histamines, that disables the proper functioning of the lungs if they accumulate too much or there's an overactive. That's why a lot of cold medicines include an antihistamine. It has a lot of effect on the very fine blood vessels and capillaries inside the nose and the lungs. So as you're going out into the weather, and it keeps getting more and more challenging, the air gets colder, there's a lot of particulates and mold and fungus from all the decaying vegetation in the fall, more mushrooms, more decaying leaves, etc., etc. And also, all kinds of moisture and the humidity as the weather changes can affect your breathing as well. Make sure that you have something to cover up your nose and mouth. Keep the air coming in nice and warm, especially when you're exercising. And do the flushes and keep a little bottle of olive oil. That can help as well. And then the antihistamines, of course, there should be the last resort, any of the over-counter drug medicine, because they can certainly impact you in all kinds of different ways with the grogginess and the alertness. And if you're going to be one of the healthiest football fans in the land, you don't want to play like that. So that is it. That's how you breathe in the warm air. Allows you to have a good time and make a lot of noise as the Buckeyes continue to romp. So tonight against Maryland, we're looking at a big win. Don't think there's going to be many problems. I think they're going to put up a lot of points. I don't think anybody expects them necessarily to put up 62 points the way they did against Nebraska. But with the bad defense that Maryland has and the defense for the Bucs playing really outstanding, I'm going to have to say that it's going to be another big margin of victory. We're going to put it up at 49 to 10. Actually, I'm gonna change it. It's gonna be 49-7. I think Maryland's only gonna get one score, and that's only if the Buckeyes make a mistake. So 49-7. There's the prediction. And for this episode of the Buckeye broadcast, thanks for tuning in. It's a good day to be a fan of the Scarlet and Gray. Go Bucks!